Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is a screencast-o-matic presentation and recording for the part of the lesson that has us looking at roles and powers of the president. Before we get started, please let me encourage you to open up to today's lesson and to scroll down the correct section and get ready to fill in the content that coincides with the fill-in-the-blank sections for the guided notes. Let's go ahead and get started, and please remember that you can play any part of this presentation for detail, clarity, or repetition later on. Let's begin. The roles and powers of the President of the United States of America. So, the express powers, the powers that are specifically listed with the detail of the office of the President, are listed in Article 2 of the Constitution of the United States. The implied or inherent powers are not specifically listed in the Constitution, but the office of the presidency has been expanded and modified throughout the years ever since inception and the days of George Washington, so that they could fit the needs and the times of the country and the world. Now, there are many different roles that a president can play. One of the first roles is chief executive. This is where the president enforces and carries out the Constitution and the federal laws of our nation. Some might say this is the most important part of the executive branch. This is a rather interesting role to fulfill too, because a president can fulfill or sign executive orders, which are a directive issued by the president that has the force of law. Executive orders in many ways are very powerful and can set a precedence for the time for a president's administration. Now, even though there's no mention of this in the Constitution, many presidents have signed executive orders. Executive orders, however, can be overturned by a law passed by Congress, a Supreme Court decision, or by the next President of the United States of America. Some examples of this might be Executive Order 9066, which authorized the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II times. Also, Executive Order 9981, which ended segregation in the military. Or even Executive Order 10730, which sent federal troops to Little Rock, Arkansas, to expedite the desegregation process. Additionally, the President of the United States also acts on the role as Commander-in-Chief. This is where the civilian head of the military forces. The President essentially has the power to control the Army, Navy, and other branches of the military. This is a really important power, as keeping the nation safe is of the utmost importance. But the President can appoint military officers. They have the final word on military actions and strategy at home and abroad. And additionally, they can send troops into battle. Please recall, though, that there are some confines and limits to this too, which we'll get into later in the next lesson. Some of these limits, from a general standpoint, are as follows. The War Powers Act of 1973 restricts the President's authority to send troops into battle. Additionally, the President must notify Congress within 48 hours of sending U.S. forces into combat of his intention to do so. Troops may only be sent into a hostile situation, though, for 60 days as well, without the approval of Congress. And additionally, Congress may pass a concurrent resolution to end combat commitment at any time. This has become an important thing in our government, mostly because of the Vietnam War and some of the events that ensued from Presidents Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, and Ford. Some question the constitutionality of the War Powers Act. However, some might argue that it is important because the balance of power and the saving of American lives is really important. Additionally, the President of the United States also acts as chief legislator, where they can influence and act on the legislation or laws in our country. Keep in mind, a president can't essentially pass laws by him or herself. They need to, of course, go about the legislative process in a correct way. They can, however, advocate for a policy agenda. For example, the President influences legislation and the lawmaking process by proposing the budget, recommending bills to Congress, we call this legislative initiative, giving the State of the Union message and address, which has become custom in American politics, and additionally calling special sessions of Congress if and when necessary. Now, additionally, the President of the United States can act on legislation by signing bills or holding the bill and allowing it to become a law without a signature. Remember, we talked about a few of these caveats in the previous unit with the legislative branch. And additionally, the President can use the power of veto or pocket veto, which is holding a bill when Congress adjourns within 10 days and not signing it. No matter what action the President takes, his or her actions can be consequential and controversial regarding any type of bill or law in this country. The President of the United States can also have the authority to adjourn Congress if the Houses cannot agree on an adjournment date. This is a very powerful position to take. Additionally, the President of the United States also acts as chief diplomat, where they're the foreign policy leader of our country. They represent us on the international stage. This has become incredibly important. The President deals with other countries tactfully and respectfully, and sometimes finds himself in very dangerous situations as far as making sure that peace and prosperity can exist and persist. The President uses diplomatic communication to communicate effectively goals and ideals that countries can advocate for. The President can appoint ambassadors to other countries, which are people, of course, who are figureheads who try to work out peaceful diplomatic relations with other countries. And the President recognizes a representative of another country coming here. They can also show disapproval by asking that representative be recalled and sent back to their country. The President accepts and greets other foreign leaders and dignitaries. And the President sets the tone of policy towards other countries. For example, the Monroe Doctrine, the Good Neighbor Policy, and the Open Door Policy have all been presidential foreign policy initiatives that have been put into place by previous presidents that have had huge ramifications for USA and other country diplomatic relations. Now, the President of the United States helps to make treaties with other countries too, but they must be approved and upheld by the Senate. The President may sign executive agreements too with other countries, where they pact with leaders of another country that do not require the approval of Senate. Sometimes pacts can be done to assure peace and prosperity within a region of the world, and also, of course, to uphold trading agreements and rights. The President of the United States also acts as the chief of state, or the head of state, where they represent the country in more of a ceremonial fashion. This is still very important in our country as we are very steeped in tradition. Additionally, the President of the United States also acts as party leader. The party leader role allows him or her to guide and help the political party by raising money and helping party members get elected. This, of course, is really important because the president, in many ways, is the image of the party. And in an election year, that is really, really magnified. The President of the United States also has other roles and powers too. In terms of judicial powers, the President appoints federal judges, Supreme Court justices, U.S. Marshals, U.S. attorneys. However, they must be approved by the Senate as well. Additionally, the President of the United States also may grant pardons. Pardons, of course, allows for full and fair forgiveness or of excuses of someone who might have committed a crime. This includes the power of amnesty, which pardons a group of people too. Additionally, a president can grant reprieve, which is where they postpone a convicted person's sentence. They can also use the power of commutation, which makes a convicted person's sentence less severe. And they can also grant clemency, which is mercy or leniency. The picture on this screen is Gerald Ford announcing his ambitions to grant Richard Nixon a full, free, and absolute pardon for his alleged actions in the Watergate scandal. Presidents also have executive privilege too. And executive privilege is basically the whole prospect of allowing members of the executive branch, including the president, to withhold information from Congress, the courts, and the American people. Sometimes this is done out of national security interests. These precedents were set by Washington, Jefferson, and Jackson. Sometimes this can be helpful during wartime. This also can be dangerous too, as we've seen in the U.S. versus Nixon case, where during the Watergate investigation, President Nixon refused to hand over the tapes of discussions held inside the Oval Office, claiming that he had executive privilege, which was protected by his right of refusal. However, Nixon's refusal was challenged by the federal prosecutors and eventually made its way to the Supreme Court. So in 1974, the Supreme Court ruled in the United States versus Nixon that executive privilege does have its limits, and Nixon had to release the tapes. Upon hearing this, Nixon made the conscious decision to resign the office of the presidency. There's also other special limits on the President of the United States too. The Senate must approve most presidential appointments. Congress can override a president's vetoes, which we talked about in the previous unit. Congress can pass laws to limit the powers of the president. And also, Congress controls funding for the executive branch too in a big, big way. Let's also not forget that the Supreme Court can declare a president's actions as unconstitutional, and that, of course, can put a healthy divide between the branches, and thus bring forth other legal precedents against a sitting president. It should also be noted here that the president, the vice president, and the executive branch officers may be impeached and removed from office at any given time. Of course, there's a procedure for this, which we're going to get into the next lesson as well. So there you guys have it. All the things I'd like for you to know about the roles and powers of the President of the United States of America. Thank you very much for tuning in, and good luck with completing the rest of the lesson.